And I think for clarity's sake, Cheryl, would you please make a roll call for quorum purposes?
Marty Brewer,
Here.
Sean Murphy Lopez, Steve Carroll, Melissa Luck, Gary Manning, Tim Gotcho, David Turk,
Here.
Mark Cooey,
Here.
Steve Williamson.
Okay, thank you.
6 present.
6 present. We need a quorum of 5, so in order. Although I understand a couple of members have to leave early today, so we will try to expedite our handling. Was there proof of notification?
Yes, there was, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. We have a 24-point agenda. What's your pleasure on the agenda? Mr. Gotcho moves to approve. Do I have a second? Mr. Turk? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? An agenda. The previous minutes, those were included in the packet. You've reviewed those, and hear any changes or corrections to those minutes? If not, I'm going to declare them corrected and amended and approved. Okay, thank you. Have a space here for public comment. That's a new one to me. So do we have public here that wishes to comment? Not that we don't listen to public comment. I mean, you know what I'm trying to say. Okay, thank you. Now, we have a number of items on your agenda, numbers 6 through 11. I'm just going to read them off very quickly here. The property tax deed sale of a certain parcel, approval of annual extension of GCS software for the property lister, the administrator's office expenditure report, the clerk's office expenditure report, treasurer's office expenditure report, and the county board expenditure report. Now, we can dig into these in depth or in detail, but we're trying to treat these as consent items because we're probably going to approve them. So does anyone wish to consider any one of these in specific detail? You've looked at them, they were in the packet. Can I get a motion then to approve all of these consent items? Mr. Cooey makes the motion. Do I have a second? Luck seconds. All those in favor of approving the consent items signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? We have approved the consent items. Brings us to number 12. Initial resolution authorizing not to exceed $8,500,000 general obligation bonds for radio and tower project and other capital improvement projects. Mr. Langrick.
Mr. Chair, looking today for a motion to recommend resolution at the May 17th, 2022 Richland County Board meeting for the authorization of borrowing not to exceed $8,500,000 in general obligation bonds for the improvement of emergency radio tower system and capital projects. Background on this item: Richland County LEJC Committee, in conjunction with True North Consulting and administration support, has reached a decision point on the desired financing of the emergency radio tower system improvements. In their April 8th meeting, the committee took action to recommend the Finance and Personnel Committee consider funding of a $8.5 million improvement project through the sale of general obligation bonds. This borrowing amount was arrived at an evaluation of 5 different proposals from 2 different vendors, many months of consideration points and debate, and with the understanding that the nature of the project leaves many future decision points ahead. To better understand the concerns of the projects, I recommend, of course, looking back on the videos and minutes offered by the committee and the discussion points, and then the Q&A document provided by Supervisor Luck, which was distributed in your county board packet at the last meeting. Public Safety Committee, composed of previous LHAC members, will take action in their May 13th meeting to possibly recommend resolution to the county board in ranking the 2 vendors in preference for engaging in contract negotiations. In other words, the resolution will recommend we engage with the selected first choice vendor to see if a suitable contract can be reached. If not with the first choice, then we would pursue the second choice vendor. Carol Worth, Richland County Municipal Advisor, has provided a report regarding the bond loan financing. The report is in your packets, and then we will pull up the report. Unless Supervisor Luck, if you wanted to say anything prior to Carol, we'll have Carol kind of guide us through the report on financing.
She's shaking her head in the negative over there. So if you read Melissa's fine synopsis in the last packet, extremely clarifying. I learned a lot, and some of my, well, not all my fears, but many of my concerns were addressed in that document.
Probably should mention one thing. So I did have one question come in that was asking me why we want to do this initial resolution to borrow not to exceed 8.5 million right now instead of waiting to when we are actually ready to borrow the money. So our intention, because this project is more than 25% equipment, it means that we only have 18 months to spend this money once we borrow it. We've been told by our consultant that it's going to take at least 24 months to complete this project. So that means that we have to do something to extend the amount of time we have to spend this money. So our intention was to bring the first payment out of either the general fund or ARPA funds or some other source of funding for the first 6 months of the project so that we could then borrow the money at the 6-month point. The other advantage to not borrowing all of the money right away is that in the first 6 months, we're going to be going through a lot of the civil engineering, and we will then have a much clearer understanding of exactly how much money we need. Right now, we don't know for sure how many towers we're going to need to build, and that's really going to be the key in knowing exactly how much we need to borrow. So we will, by doing it this way, we will have 6 months to get the project going. We will have a very clear picture of what we need, and then we can go ahead and borrow exactly what we need. So we're estimating it's going to be no more than 8.5 million. The hope is that it will be closer to 7.5 or closer to 8 million. But we wanted to make sure that we have some cushion in there just in case we have to build more towers than we think we're going to have to build at this point. So Supervisor Carroll, I know that's a question that you've had. Does that explain or help clarify what process we're going through?
Mr. Carroll, go ahead.
Yeah, I had a couple of concerns. I wasn't sure if I was going to ask them now or after Carol's done her presentation, but one of them was the timing of this, the fact that very shortly, in just a couple more months, we're going to see this long-term view capital budgeting process that the administrator and you guys have been working on. I was worried that we would commit to this borrowing before knowing what else might be very important, and they haven't all been looked at on the same footing. And so I'm just wondering if we can't wait a little bit until we've got those other things out in front of us and making sure we are utilizing up to our debt limit with the things we really need to right now. So that was one concern. And I might as well mention my other question, and that is, I looked at the 119-page thing from True North. I watched the video from the LEJC, read the frequently asked question document. So I've been looking at this, but I never did quite see where we went from the 3 options that True North initially gave us to deciding on the 95 coverage. I don't know where that decision happened, and I want to make sure that we all realize there were 2 other options on the table, and do we need the Cadillac or the economy car? That's my concern.
Okay, Mr. Carroll, thank you for those questions. Now, can I ask Melissa to respond to those, please?
So the other two options that you're talking about, the one was 3 point something million, one was 5.5. both of those options would only partially fix issues that we have with communicating throughout our county. We would not be able to get 95/95 coverage, which is an industry standard. So when we had conversations with True North and the committee, the concern is that we would put $3 million into this, and then a few years down the road, we'd be right back where we needed in order to get to the industry standard. We would have to then spend $7 million, because it wasn't really going to get us anywhere close to being able to get to the 95/95. We were just going to buy some equipment to kind of string us along until we could invest more, was essentially what was going to happen with
Melissa, can you explain 95/95?
Right. So what that means is 95% of the time they will be able to communicate in 95% of the area of Richland County from a radio on the hip. Indoor. Yeah. So, and it's a pretty standard. I mean, it is the industry standard. It's what everyone is trying to achieve. And of course, because of where we live and because radio communication happens linear with our hills and valleys, that creates challenges. And that's why we have to be very strategic about where we have our towers and what towers we can use that are already existing.
And then as far as delaying this, can you address that?
I tried really hard to make it clear. So in the first section of our document where we're talking about all the failures that we've had, the problem is if you have a failure in this area, it's someone's life or someone's property that's on the line. So if you're trying to call an ambulance and the ambulance isn't getting the call because our equipment is failing, a 5-minute delay in us being able to communicate to that ambulance service is a matter of life and death. Same thing with fire. Same thing with our deputies out there risking their lives. If they can't call for backup, it's pretty serious. So the consequences are pretty high for if we do have a failure. And unfortunately, we keep having failures, keep having pieces of equipment. Almost every piece of equipment we have is well past end of life. Not just months, we're talking years past end of life. Our dispatch center, we got used when it was at end of life from La Crosse in 2016, and we're still using it. And it continually fails. I hate to even say that out loud, because I feel like I'm jinxing us. But we have amazing tech. We have good support, but we're to the point where they don't even have equipment parts to fix the equipment. So the other part that I think is important to remember is that this has been talked about and put off since 2010. It's in the FAQ document.
I think that's about right. Even before that, Melissa, it was
right. So we put this off numerous times, and I agree with, in a perfect world, we should be waiting until we have our full list in front of us. But the stakes are just too high. We're gambling with people's.
And Melissa is the current chair of was the current chair of LAJC. And this came to fruition under her, but as I was the previous chair of LAJC, and before me, a gentleman by the name of Fred Clary was the chairman of LAJC. And unfortunately for Melissa, the prior chairman kind of tried to avoid this decision because the thinking at that time was, well, probably the state or the feds are going to come in and save the day here. Didn't happen. Won't happen, especially if we spend the money. But that's what we were hoping on, praying it might happen.
Mr. Linkert, can you give them your opinion as to the priority of this, given that you know most of what's on your list of other capital projects that are going to be displaced because of this?
My opinion on it is it's kind of a bedrock necessity service on behalf of the county to be able to provide that type of a service, to be able to reach out to coordinate with emergency managements, with fire and rescue, with law enforcement, with our first responders. I think we even have folks from highway and other types of partnerships that are using this service. So in context, and again, I've shared with you folks on my little philosophy of government with the three main pillars of government being that you're providing a law enforcement and judicial system, that you're providing a tax way to kind of fund it, and then you're providing protection kind of from outside threats is the three pillars of government. This one nestles into the one that's near and dear to me based on my experiences. The other items that are going to come forward with you on capital are certainly things that we need to make the mechanic and the machinery work. But again, it's kind of a pillar type of a thing. The other type of a slight nuance that I think you're going to see on it with the capital planning is that the other items on there, we're really going to be looking at a short-term financing solution versus like going to a general obligation bonding solution for a real long-term type of a thing. This is a new project and a stand-up project versus the other projects that are arriving. There's a lot of type of deferred maintenance type of issues. In speaking to your second point, Supervisor Carroll, we did have action with the County Board Resolution 21-133 in September, where we did bring before the County Board a resolution that did say, now therefore be it resolved by the Richland County Board, the supervisors, that a specification design for the radio project shall meet the 95 coverage recommended by True North Consulting and Law Enforcement and Judicial Committee. So there was a decision point that happened at a board level to kind of get that blessing on the project on behalf of the county on which direction we were going to go with the specification design that went out. Did that answer your questions?
Steve, do you have another comment or question? Go ahead.
So I'm okay with that. But the thing I was worried about was, okay, if we can get to 90% with option 2, I think that's what they said. Again, that's just an estimate. Is it worth another $2 to $3 million to get up to 95? Fair question. The decision process, again, yes, as a board, we voted on that, but I don't know that we realized we voted on option 3 only instead of option 1, 2, or 3. So that's where I was trying to understand.
Okay, Mr. Carroll, and I think one of our county constitutional officers would like to respond to that, Mr. Even, our county treasurer, but also in another role, he's the head of EMS services in the Cazenovia area.
So I'll be speaking in my capacity as the director of EMS in Cazenovia. You can ask Clay Porter. We are the squeakiest of wheels when it comes to our through the system. Can you hear me now? All right. As far as the dispatch center goes, we are the squeakiest of wheels when it comes to issues. We have a steady stream of contact with Clay, Aaron Wallace, and the dispatch center when calls come through, but they are unintelligible. For example, one situation where a patient did end up passing away prior to our arrival, or I shouldn't say prior to our arrival, prior to being loaded into our ambulance, it took 4 times for that page to get out so we could assemble a crew. I was standing on Main Street, out in the open, not in a building. It took 4 times of calling dispatch to repage it out for us to get a page that could be recognized that we have an ambulance call, this is emergent, we need to get there. That patient passed away. That got documented in our report as an equipment failure on the county's behalf and submitted to the state. The next time, more recently, last month or in March, Clay, when Bunker Tower went down, the only way we knew it went down was because Cazenovia ambulance was paged for a call 15 minutes worth of travel time from our station, and we never received the page. The dispatch center paged it out 3 times before automatically moving on to paging the next nearest ambulance. Clay, correct me if I'm wrong, it's 5 minutes between pages? 15 minutes before the next nearest ambulance was paged to respond to that call. That ambulance then had a 20-minute response time from Reedsburg at a minimum to get there. There are times where, with our truck radios, we cannot reach the county dispatch center. That is a 100-watt radio. We should not have any issues talking to anybody. I can talk to county dispatch more times in our district easier than I can talk to our own dispatch center. And that's simply a ridge and a valley away. So when it comes to, is it really worth that 5%? It absolutely is worth that extra 5% for what it's going to cost. For the cheaper options, it improved the system which we had, but it did not improve coverage in the Casanova and Viola areas, which is our problem for coverage. So that additional $2 to $3 million ensures that the areas where we cannot communicate at all, at least gives us some level of communication with our dispatch center, ensures that we can receive pages on our handheld pagers, pagers on our hips. Currently, we have a secondary backup system organized through MIS to send pages to our cell phones. That is meant as a secondary notification device by all intensive purposes by the vendor and our department. It is currently being used as our primary notification device because we just cannot rely on our pagers on our current communication system. The limits to that are if you don't have cell phone service or Wi-Fi, which, as we know with our county, we lack in those areas. You're not going to get the page, or if the computer and MIS automatically updates, the system is down over the weekend and we don't have that capability either. So there are weekends where we don't know if we are getting a page or not.
So I have a follow-up question then for you. Would 9595 get it to you? I know you can't guarantee that, but
There's no guarantee because the 9595 follows the 10 or 5 watt radio that we carry on our hip. I want to say it's a 5 watt. The pagers are a receive-only device. They don't require quite as much signal to get the page through, but based on their coverage maps, the heat maps that they provided, the first two cheapest options did not provide any improvement for the Casanova area, nor did they for Viola.
thank you, Mrs. Luck.
Right,
Do you have
so
a
we
comment?
did go back to the vendors to clarify that we absolutely need coverage in CAS and Viola. And so both vendors have been informed of that. And we should be hearing from Mike at our next meeting how they are responding to making sure we have coverage in those two specific areas. Yuba was also brought up to me, and so I'll ask about Yuba as well. But we are aware of those and want to make sure that we do have coverage from the vendors.
Is there anything I missed, Clay?
Follow-up,
Thank you.
anybody on that issue? Yes, Mr. Williamson.
So Supervisor Luck, we had a Richland County Fire Chiefs meeting last week, and discussion was brought up about purchasing radios for departments. So have you talked to Darren about, they're doing a study to see who needs radios?
Yes, we asked them to inventory,
Okay.
inventory all the different equipment to make
If
sure.
I understand, is there like 1.5 million in the 8.5 for radio purchases?
There is, and we know that there are a number of places, I believe even you have P25 compatible. So there still will be some costs because there likely will have to be some firmware update or some other kind of update to be able to use their P25 compatible equipment on a P25 system. But yes, we are currently seeking that information, and hopefully they are responding and we'll know by the 13th.
And it was also brought up, I think the understanding, Darren was there as well, but the impression I got from the fire chiefs was this 8.5 was only going to be about 80% coverage. I thought that's what the guys were talking. So I don't know if there's some misinterpretation there. So this at 8.5.
No, that's 95.95.
95.95. Well, good.
The vendor, once we sign the contract, they are obligated to meet that criteria for that price.
Because part of our discussion was, as a group, was there's not $1.5 million of radios need to be purchased, would be to put that $1.5 million towards a better system to get to the 95.95. But if we can get to 95.95 with 8.5.
Right. I mean, it's going to be all about the towers and how well the towers can talk to each other.
Thank you.
So, and each tower is, I think the last she said was like $400,000 per tower. So if we wouldn't need the 1.5 million for equipment, that is the possibility that, but they also have almost $1 million in contingency in there for the strict purpose of if we need more towers, then we are anticipating we would have money in contingency to put more towers up to get us to the 95.95.
As we know, inflation is
And
here,
right,
so it's going to cost more.
which is another reason I don't think it's going to get cheaper the longer.
Okay. Carol Worth of Wisconsin Public Finance Professionals has made the trip over here from Waukee, Brookfield, actually, isn't it? Yeah. A little bit closer. And since she's here and has come all that way, I would certainly like to hear from her. So I'm going to give the floor over to Carol Worth. Tell us some of the information we'll need.
All right, thank you very much. All right, I have a report that is presenting information about the $8.5 million number and what that means to the county in terms of a potential tax impact. I also, in this report, explain the process of the initial resolution and what that means to the county in terms of why are you doing this now? The fact that it does not commit the county to a borrowing, but rather is a statutory step that's required for county boards to have what's called authority to consider a borrowing going forward. So with that, I'm going to just explain the $8.5 million portion of it by making some assumptions, because we are months away from making any final determinations with regard to a borrowing. So we're going to, at this point in time, take the $8.5 million as being the estimated project cost. With this assumption, we are saying that the funds would be received in late October of 2022. We anticipate the project completion by April of 2024. The debt would be repaid over 15 years. Legally, the county would have 20 years to amortize the debt. We chose 15 years to be more in line with useful life of the project being financed. We are using estimated interest rates based on Wisconsin sales, municipal bond sales that occurred in late April. I did verify them against sales that took place yesterday in the market, and we're still in good shape in terms of what's presented in this report. But of course, it's a market, and the interest rates are going to change until the county would lock in a financing. It is also based on, currently, the county has a bond rating from Moody's of an A3. So all of those things go into projecting costs associated with debt service and your tax base. So I've called them two different schedules that are included in this rather than two options, because they are basically the same schedule. One includes, if you were to consider a short-term borrowing this year yet for your short-term capital projects, and if you were not to, just to give you an idea again of tax rate impact as you go forward with making decisions. So Schedule 1 is the $8.5 million over 15 years. We are including the 2021 short-term borrowing in the column that says existing debt service, because it was existing debt service that was repaid in 2022. We are saying in that schedule that you would not do a short-term borrowing in 2022. That would actually be an impact in 2023 budget. And so therefore, the combined estimated debt service column would represent the impact on the levy before and after the issuance of $8.5 million for the tower project. And we're also stating this impact using your 2021 equalized value, which means your tax base as you know it right now. We're not making any projections with regard to that. Schedule 2 is identical, with the exception that the existing debt column is going to, for 2023, is going to estimate that you're going to do the same type of $1,050,000 short-term borrowing later this year, which will have the repayment in 2023. So So that's the two schedules that we're going to look at. So page number 2 has the amortization schedule. So I'm just going to walk you through the format, and it'll be exactly the same on the next page. But again, the columns to pay attention to is, as you see, calendar year, then moving to the right, you'll see principal, rate, estimated interest, and then total GO bonds. That's your your $8.5 million repaid over 15 years. And you'll see there that there is interest only from 23 through 25, and principal starts in the year 26. This is intentional because if you look at again, going at the top, moving one column over, it says all county existing debt service. The first number is $3,593,000. Okay, in 2022, that was your existing debt column that included the short-term borrowing. So you'll see it goes from $3,500,000 and then drops down to $2,400,000, because in this scenario, it is assumed that you will not be doing a short-term note borrowing. Okay, so this is your existing debt without any future short-term note borrowings. So you can see how that column goes down to $2,400,000 for a couple of years, and then down to $2,200,000 for a couple of years, and then down to $1,497,000. So that is the reason why it's interest only during those years of 23 through 25. And then taking the $8.5 million 15-year amortization, adding it to the existing debt, gives us our combined estimated debt service. Okay, again, starting in 22, the number is $3,593,000, and then it drops to $2,744,000, stays in that $2,007,000 range all the way through 2028 before it starts to decline. Okay, so again, it's summarized at the bottom of that schedule where it says comparison of tax levy impact. It takes the tax levy for budget year 22, which was the $3,593,000, and compares it to what would be your impact in 2023 budget, which is the $2,744,000 number. So again, these numbers can be found in the combined estimated far right-hand column at the top. So you would actually have a tax levy decline of $848,000, again, driven by the fact that this schedule assumes you will not have a short-term note borrowing, and that's the reason for the decline. So that would be a decrease of 63 cents per thousand, which on $100,000 of property value would be $63. Okay. All right, so your estimated debt service remains at that level for 6 years and declines unless you are doing short-term borrowing. So the next schedule on page 3, again, set up identical. There is no change to the $8.5 million the way it is structured on this page. The all county existing debt column, there is a change. In the year 2022, it is the same number. However, 2023 is now $3,525,000. That is making the assumption that the county does $1,050,000 of short-term notes and later in this year with a first payment and only payment due on March 1 of 2023. That's where it bumps up that number. So therefore, when we go to the combined estimated debt column on the far right, you'll see that you're going from $3,593,000 this year. That then becomes an increase to $3,804,000 the following year. And that then is an increase of $211,789, or in terms of a tax rate, is a 16-cent increase, which is $16 on $100,000 of property value. And since the existing debt service is kind of flat thereafter for several years, that would give you, again, a little bit of an idea of what would happen if you did or did not do short-term note borrowing in the years following. Okay, kind of answers that question at the same time. Okay, so Again, just a before and after the 8.5 million, also a before and after with or without your consideration of short-term borrowing that will yet to be made at a future meeting. Okay. All right, then the next page 4 is just to give you the assumption being used for the short-term borrowing. So the assumption is the same principal amount of $1,050,000. The coupon or the rate would be, at this time, it's shown as 2.75. And that produces the interest number so that the total impact of additional debt service in 2023 is that $1,060,000 number. Okay, so again, it's just there to document the assumption used to arrive at the number for calendar year 2023. Okay, any questions on that portion? Because then I'll move into the initial resolution part.
I want everyone to understand that the $1 million short-term borrowing that Carol is mentioning is something that we've initiated since Clint came. And
Right.
Clint has used that as a mechanism to fund certain capital projects that otherwise wouldn't be funded. So, but it's short-term. It's not
Correct.
it's not a 15-year obligation or anything. But it hits harder initially,
Right,
being short-term. So I want
Correct.
everyone to understand that.
correct, correct. And the initial resolution that we're talking about does not address authority to proceed with the short-term borrowing either.
Yep.
It is just simply a calculation so that hopefully it answers some of the what ifs that you may be thinking about at this time. Okay? Okay, then we'll move into the initial resolution. And again, the key point to any time the county board considers action on an initial resolution is that it's about authority. You're not borrowing the money. You're not giving approval to on a borrowing. It's about giving the county board the authority to move to the next step to take action on a borrowing. And that is the way Wisconsin statutes read for counties. Okay? Cities, towns, villages, school districts do not have that type of statutory provision. Counties, this is the way county boards have to take. Number one step is to give you as a board authority to go forward with even considering a borrowing. The key point is that it does not commit you. You could adopt a resolution like this and simply just make decisions for going forward that says, all right, first of all, you got to have a not to exceed number. Again, that's part of the process. That number is just a not to exceed number. That's the only amount of authority you're giving yourself. That doesn't mean you have to issue 8.5 million. It just means you can't issue more than that. It also means that you are restricted to certain purposes. It doesn't mean the language in the initial resolution, which is what we call the purpose language, right now reads financing capital improvement projects consisting of the radio and tower project, facility maintenance and improvements, and equipment acquisition. And this was drafted by your bond counsel, which is the firm of Quarles and Brady. Okay, so that is what you're restricted to using the borrowed money on. The resolution, in order to pass, again, this is a statutory thing, requires a 3/4 vote of the county board members elect. So that's 16 yes votes. So if people are absent from the meeting, that's an automatic no. Okay, so there are times when you are actually doing the borrowing. That resolution requires a majority vote of the members present at the meeting. Okay, so two very different ways of approval process. So that's a requirement for this step, again, to give you authority. Again, it does not commit the board. It does provide authority at a later date, and that authority is good for 5 years from the date that your initial resolution is adopted. So during that 5 years, the county may issue some of it, all of it. You can do it in phases, but as long as collectively, however many pieces of financing you choose to do during that 5 years, collectively cannot exceed 8.5 million. So that's the way authority works, okay? If you don't use it, in 5 years it expires, okay? So again, it's a very important step to remember. You're not locking yourself into a borrowing at this step. You are locking yourself into authority to borrow, okay? All right, now the next page deals with a timeline, okay? So maybe this helps put a little perspective on when you do certain things, what's required in order to actually do a borrowing. And so we start with the initial resolution action occurring at the May 17th County Board meeting. We would actually be preparing to enter the bond market in the months of July and August. We have to prepare what's called an official statement, which is like a prospectus on the county. There's legal documents that are prepared, and the big one, it would be applying for the Moody's rating on this financing. Okay, when we do the short-term $1 million, because they are so short, we do not apply for a bond rating. It would not be cost effective. But in this case, there is a very major bond rating process that we go through. And that takes some time to prepare for. And we have, again, on this timeline, or we would say maybe at the end of the month of August, we would have this rating call. And that would give Moody's sufficient time for them to then go to their rating committee and produce and release the bond rating and a credit report. That information has to be distributed into the marketplace before any underwriter would consider bidding on the issue. We would suggest that on September 13th, that underwriters would submit their bids, and we would verify them and bring the final results to the county board. In this case, it would be the same evening of September 13th, which, by the way, is not a regularly scheduled county board meeting. The reason for that is your regularly scheduled county board meeting happens to fall on a day that the federal open markets, the Fed meeting occurs. The Fed is meeting right now, and the decision, of course, is to raise interest rates. It's been widely, I guess, discussed in the marketplace and predicted that the action today will result in a 0.5% increase. Once the market becomes comfortable with that prediction, that's built into the interest rates ahead of time. So right now, the interest rates that I was showing you on this 8.5 million is already taking that into consideration, that they're going to come out with the news as a result of this meeting that they're increasing rates by 0.5%. If they come out with something else that is not expected, the market's going to be shook up for a little while, maybe a week or so, but then it'll settle down and move on to the next prediction. So this dollar amount, 8.5 million, I would not want to put you right in the middle of a time where somebody's sitting on the sideline and not bidding because of waiting to see what's going to happen on that day when the Federal Reserve releases its information. Some underwriters choose not to bid. Some underwriters will bid with a little more cushion in their bid to protect themselves from volatility. So that's the reason for suggesting that if we do this in September, that it would be a time that would be for a special board meeting away from that action occurring. Okay. That would be the day that you would be asked to lock in your borrowing and your interest rate. That's the day when you will be borrowing money. Whatever that number is, that is the day that you are locking in. Now, obviously, we have to make some decisions and know by the time the underwriters are submitting their bids if there are, what is going to be your final number, because we need time to react. But nonetheless, this just kind of gives you some idea of when your vote means to borrow money, and that would be the September 13th date. That would give us about a month before the county would receive the money, and when the county receives money, it's all of the money at one time comes to the county. That goes into a project account and can only be used for the purposes stated in the initial resolution. So the initial resolution itself is on the next page. You can see it's a fairly short resolution compared to some of the others associated with a borrowing. Again, right in the title, it's initial resolution authorizing, okay, not to exceed the $8.5 million. It would be for a radio and tower project and other capital improvements. And again, the first whereas mentions that. The second whereas states the section of the statutes that the county is able to issue this debt. And then the be it resolved, borrowing not to exceed $8.5 million, issuing general obligation bonds, and again, to finance those purposes. And then it continues to say, there be and there hereby is levied on all taxable property in the county a direct annual irrepealable tax in the amount to pay principal and interest. That would happen if the county approved the sale resolution. Okay, the initial resolution itself isn't levying a tax. That just means that this is giving you authority to take the next step, which in that resolution will have a tax levy for the principal and interest. There is no tax levy stated in this document. So just wanted you to understand the language, and also two other things. You say, well, let's take the two what ifs. What happens if $8.5 million is not enough? Well, this is only giving you authority to do $8.5 million. If for some reason you needed more, you would have to go through this step again. You would have to adopt another initial resolution to give you authority to do anything beyond $8.5 million. If you say, well, what happens if $8.5 million is too much? Well, you can borrow less than $8.5 million. Or if you say at the time of borrowing, this is the best number we know, and things will change over the construction period. Well, first of all, you only have $8.5 million, but let's say that something happens during the construction period and you have $300,000 that is not used. What can you do about that? You can use it to offset the tax levy for debt service. The other thing you can do with it is you could use it for projects that meet the description of this initial resolution. And that means facility maintenance and improvements and equipment acquisition. You can use it for a project that meets that language. Okay, those are all your options with regard to the what ifs of this resolution. Okay.
Okay, thank you, Carol, for that information. I'd like a motion to send the resolution to the county board for the 3/4 vote required to authorize us to go ahead and borrow the amount. Okay, we're not authorizing the amount right now. We're not saying we're going to borrow. We're authorizing. Okay, we're voting on an motion here to get this over to the county board on May 17th. Then a 3/4 vote will be required to authorize the county to go ahead. So right now, I just need a motion to get this over to the county board. Thank you.
Williamson will second.
Luck makes the motion, Williamson seconds. All those in favor of the motion to forward the resolution signify by saying aye. Opposed? Motion is passed. Thank you. Thank you, Carol.
Okay, thank you.
Drive carefully,
Oh, yes, thank you very much.
don't for the deer.
Oh,
Mr. Gotchel, that item number 16 be jumped ahead of the next three items on the agenda. Item number 16 being approving the use of 2021 Health and Human Services remaining funds. Because Tim's gonna have to leave here at 2:00. So here, if I don't have an objection, we're going to pick up item number 16 next. That is approving the use of 2021 Health and Human Services remaining funds. And who needs to speak to that?
Director Thorson is on. Tracy, can you hear us?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Administrator Langrick. So this is a request to utilize some funds that are would be a carryover from 2021. So Health and Human Services anticipates that we ended the year, this is unaudited, of course, with returning approximately $656,000 back to the general fund. As you know, all funds remaining return to the general fund. And so this request is to be allowed to utilize some of those funds to address our retention and recruitment efforts in the department, to provide both retention bonuses for existing staff as well as sign-on or incentive bonuses in order to recruit for the vacant positions that we have. As you know, and I think I've reported to this committee a few different times, just the staffing crisis that we're experiencing at Health and Human Services. We ended the year in 2021. For the full year, we had lost 18 staff who had resigned and moved on to other ventures or positions. And there were losses that we experienced in every single unit of our agency, except for public health. Fortunately, especially because of the pandemic, our public health staff have remained working. We also experienced 2 additional resignations in the first months of 2022. So the Health and Human Services Board at our April 14th meeting had affirmed that the remaining funds from our 2021 Health and Human Services core budget come from sources that are intended to be utilized to fund human service programs and services and operations, and therefore the board felt those funds should be applied to address our staffing crisis. With that, the board recommended that barring any action by the county board in 2022 to establish a wage placement progression plan and to address the high employee costs of insurance, that rather than returning all of the remaining funds from the 2021 HHS budget, that a portion of those funds should be used to instead address the retention and recruitment issues that we're experiencing. The board identified $147,347 of those remaining funds that they had designated. In the page 2 of our summary sheet that you have, you can see the sources of those remaining funds that Health and Human Services would be returning. Those are the funds that have come in. Many of those funds, I should point out, and we did provide a report to the Health and Human Services Board in March, came from sources that we weren't able to plan or budget for, so there were not expenses to utilize those funds. It's pretty significant to have that high of amount of funding that would be returning to the general fund. But many of those sources were things that either we couldn't have anticipated receiving, or they came in so late in the year that there were not expenses that we could utilize them for.
Okay, Tracy?
Yes.
Okay, I have a couple questions for you. This is Chair Brewer speaking. You use the phrase core budget, and I think that's to differentiate versus the placement budget. Is that not correct?
Thank you. Yes, that's correct. So the placement funds, there's two placement funds, the child placement fund and the adult placement fund. And in those funds, I should point out that the child placement fund ended the year with a $105,000 deficit, and the adult fund ended the year with a $99,000 deficit. And what typically happens is before funds are returned back to the general fund, we try to use any remaining funds in the core budget to cover the costs if there's a deficit in those placement funds. And so with that $656,000 that we estimate is remaining from the core budget, which is all of the other services that Health and Human Services provides, after those two placement funds are made whole, there would be remaining $452,000 that would typically go back to the general fund.
And can you tell me what your original estimate budgeted amount for child placement and adult placement was? Can you give me those figures?
Yeah, I don't have them at the top of my head, but I can grab them quickly here.
Does anyone have any questions while Tracy's looking for that information? Yes, Ms. Luck.
So, Mr. Langrick, do you have any thoughts on, because this is not the only department that has had extensive turnover, so by doing this would be potentially fixing one area. Do you have any thoughts on how we might address this in other areas? I mean, are you planning, Director Thorson, are you planning on using all of the leftover money to, I assume, give raises, or what exactly are you proposing you do to help with retention with this money?
Yeah, we're not exactly coming with a specific plan. I know we've presented some plans in February of addressing recruitment and retention issues that didn't move forward. And so I think what we're asking today is to commit some funding to address that. And then we would need to come back to you with a real specific plan of how we would address that recruitment issue and how we would address retention issues. I do have that number now for how the placement fund ended.
Okay, thank you. Can you give us those?
We ended the year, so there was a total of $1,009,619 was set aside in tax levy for those combined two placement funds. And we ended the year with $1,214,122. That's our estimate. Sometimes when the auditors come, they correct that number a little bit, but about $200,000 over the amount of tax levy that was set aside.
Well, I must have heard you wrong, because the second number you gave us was less than the first number, so wasn't it?
No, 1,214,000 was the amount of placement expenses, and the original tax levy that was set aside was 1 million and then $9,000, 1,009,000.
That wrong. Thank you. Clarification. Okay. The reason I'm hammering on the placement cost is, this has always been a problem, has been for a number of years, and it always in the past, and I really compliment Tracy on budgeting correctly for this. still a little bit under budget, but I know she's been making great strides in trying to get this number in a manageable form for us, and I appreciate that. Mr. Langrick, you have a comment?
My position is from previous conversations is to address this on behalf of the entire county. The plan that we have marching forward is based on our discussion points from previous meetings where we talked about trying to incorporate CPI or cost of living increases into our annual wage schedule plan, and then also trying to meet the marks on achieving the goals for our Carlson-Detman wage schedule. So right now, the plan that is being drafted up to bring forward to you next month includes for general employees, a 5% CPI increase going forward into 2023, as well as then asking for 2 steps in the Carlson schedule, not for everybody, but to allow for progression for senior employees up another 2 steps in efforts of trying to get to the final step 8, which I believe is our market value. With specifications to Tracy's specific positions, and there's certainly anecdotal, more than anecdotal trends across the county with different departments that are struggling both in recruitment and retention. Certainly Tracy has some positions that have been open now for, I think some of your job posting, Tracy's, have been open and vacant since before my arrival. In addressing those specific types of positions, I've also been in tune to conversations where correct me if I'm wrong, our wage schedule may attract people that they can come in and they can get hours and such, and then they realize that they'll actually do better off as a contracted employee or a contracted service, and then they separate from us, and then by lack of having anybody in the area, we're kind of obligated then to contract with them for services at a higher hourly type of a rate. So I feel that there's certainly some positions there that we have to evaluate because we can't get anyone. In context of retention, I think the argument's going to quickly spread like wildfire across your entire organization again on retention issues of trying to raise to keep people is going to lead to Me Too's from across the departments.
Mrs. Luck.
So does it not make sense then that we could potentially earmark this money, but for a countywide effort and not just for HHS? Sorry, Tracy.
It would say that becomes then a matter of perception and a matter of timing. If it's something that you want to do now, this is money that's been identified through a department budget. If this is put in context of we're going to address this going forward into 2023, then this is funds that you can imagine it going towards a HHS effort, and then other types of funds and revenues and such then facilitating other departments. It's past this year, it becomes an eye of the beholder.
So your intention is to start addressing this in the budget process for 2023, not to make any move to do any correction in 2022?
That's where my current direction is through finance and personnel. Again, though, I can appreciate, especially with our positions, that we're unable to recruit anyone to even address those, and had additional conversations then too that talk on are we going to be able to continue to provide those services without being able to find folks to fill those positions.
Okay, I'm going to sum this up. My perception anyway. Tracy has the money left over in her budget, and she'd like to use it to address some issues that she sees as wanting in her department, filling some vacancies that have occurred. Whereas the other option would be, let's just take this money, put it back in the general fund, and look toward trying to help all employees across the county. I think those are the issues here. Sir, Mr. Gotchel.
So I can certainly appreciate all the sentiments and wanting to keep things fair and consistent across the organization. Read my bio online. I want to address the staffing crisis that we have. I think that's the number one option. I think fiscal 2023, calendar 2023, we're dustbin of history pretty soon here. Tracy, you mentioned some turnover numbers. Can you talk about your current staffing levels, in particular in child protection and the mental health unit?
Sure. Certainly, those are the two areas that we are struggling the most. We are down to two child protection positions. We just hired a child protection case manager who will start at the end of May, hopefully. Sometimes people have accepted positions and then they've found something better and moved on. But those two positions in child welfare with a small staff is about 20%, well, 25% of the whole staff doing child welfare work. So two positions down is huge for that unit. In mental health, we have had a master's degree crisis position that has been open for longer than a year. We have not been able to recruit a master's degree person for that. We've had adult protective services crisis combination position that the board did approve us creating where we saw the need, but we've never been able to recruit for that. We have, I think, let me apologize. I think this is in your summary sheet for what we have for vacancies. So 8 positions remain unfilled as of the 27th. So there are 2 in the area of the child protection services and 5 mental health crisis positions. And certainly my position will be vacant. But the concern is for the mental health and the child protection services.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Langrick, do you have a comment? You do not,
I do
okay.
not.
I do have another one.
Mr. Gotchel,
I think there's potentially a bridge for us to do all of the above here, a comprehensive study perhaps in 2023, while addressing some of these pockets, and certainly a good way to address a particular staffing crisis within an agency is through agency surplus. I know a little bit about the finances at HHS from a past job, some of you might be aware of, and I've never seen an overage like this. And I think there's a bit of a quandary for me ethically, particularly with line number 4, 5, and 6 that have expressed at least written consent that this money is given to bolster the operations at HHS. And I just don't think we're accomplishing that by sending it all back to the general fund and waiting for an aggregate to come 7 or 8 years later to do something in the county. So that's why I would still be in favor of taking the portion that was earmarked in this suggestion to use for specific staffing needs at HHS.
are you making that in form of a motion?
I will, yep.
Okay, Mr. Gotchel moves that we take the suggested amount. It was 434.37, 347.
No, it's 147, 347.
Tim, you're good with the language as presented for Cheryl's sake? Thank you.
Mayor, April 27th of 21, is that supposed to be April 27th of 22? Tracy or Kim, do you know?
Yeah, I apologize. That should be 22. Yes. Are you talking about the staff, what the updated staffing issue was?
Yes, Tracy.
Yeah, I apologize that should be this year, as of this year, April 27th.
Okay, so we have a motion, I guess. Motion is to approve the resolution, but go ahead and send it to the county board for their response. The body. Yes, sir, Mr. Langren.
I don't think we have a resolution at hand right now. It would be to kind of give correct me if I'm wrong here, but it's to kind of say that it's okay to have this earmark amount of money for HHS to then figure out how it's going to be implemented on behalf of,
Okay, thank you. I think I got confused here.
I think a resolution down the road would be warranted though.
Okay, so we simply have a motion to do what Tracy has suggested. Do I have a second on that? Do I have a second? Do I have a second? Motion fails because we don't have a second. Anyone else? Mrs. Luck?
I think I would be more willing to do this if they actually had some kind of idea of what they were going to do, not just a blanket here. You know,
Well, I
and I
think,
realize that Director Thorson is leaving, so I don't know who exactly would come up with an idea, but I think it would make more sense to come up with the idea and then ask for the money.
okay. Do you have a response to that, Tracy?
Yeah, you know, certainly we were looking for the commitment to have the money set aside. And then of course, because it would have payroll and other implications, we would have to come forward with that proposal to follow up. So we didn't bring them together as a package. Part of that was, you know, we tried a couple of presentations in February that I think didn't gain any traction. And so we were trying to look at, you know, what would be the best way to address both of these needs. So we didn't come forward with a plan. I can certainly understand wanting to see, you know, what the plan would be and kind of an estimated cost.
So with that explanation, does that give anyone an idea for another motion? Mrs.
Honestly,
Luck?
I agree with Supervisor Gotchel. I mean, I think that waiting till 2023 is probably a long time to have these openings. So, I mean, I would be open to the idea of taking some of this overage money and addressing it, you know, more than just HHS, but countywide yet this year. And I don't know if that's pie in the sky kind of, I realize it's a lot of work, but if HHS comes up with a plan that might work for retention in their department, it likely would work in other departments as well and potentially be something we could do yet this year.
I'm going to ask Administrator Langrick to comment on that, because he'll be the one doing the work.
If that's the guidance that we have, I can work with Director Thorson on understanding, you know, immediate needs and trying to put some type of a plan that comes back with several courses of actions with specifics to try to address, in my opinion, their recruitment efforts is the number one goal and retention efforts is the number two goal. Try to bring back something for you folks to consider.
Thank you. Okay. It sounds to me like we're asking that we not consider this today, but we will consider it immediately. So I think we lie for the moment, unless you really want to put it into specific language, Melissa. I guess what I would suggest is that we leave it with the promise from the administrator that he's going to look at it. Yeah, well, okay, let's make that a motion.
Is that what you're asking?
I think it would be more colorful as a motion to make the administrator promise.
I like the promise.
I'm not making that motion.
So you don't want to make the motion to have?
I don't want to make him promise.
No, but you would like him to look at it.
I do. So I guess, I mean, I can make a motion instructing the administrator to evaluate countywide how we could address recruitment and retention.
Thank you. Do we have a second to that motion?
Second.
Gotcha, seconds. Okay. And I don't know, but maybe some of the other major budgets are running this way.
Right. I
Are
mean,
they?
we did have a strange year with money coming in
It's been
from
a
ARPA and
strange
things like that, so. I would also say for 2022. No, sooner rather than later. Yeah.
All right, we have a motion and a second, then kind of pushes it over on Clint. And Cheryl's got the wording if anyone wants to hear it. No, I think we're ready to vote. All those in favor of that motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay, we bounced it over to Clint. Thank you, Tracy. We've got a couple other items here, I think. $17, sure, well, we can take that. Number 17, since Tracy's here with us, approved to eliminate the early intervention special educator position and replace it with a children's long-term support and birth to 3 case manager positions. Mr. Langrick?
I would defer to Director Thorson if you're still unavailable with us, Tracy.
Tracy?
Yes,
explain
thank
this
you,
one.
Ms. Thank you, Administrator Langret and Mr. Chair. I do also want to point out that I believe we have our CLTS and Birth to 3 supervisor, Lori Cui, and our behavioral health manager, Miranda Culver, on who will fill in any gaps if there are any as I speak to this. So this is a request. Currently, Health and Human Services has a position called Early Intervention Special Educator position. And that position requires a special education teaching license. It's a requirement for, I believe, our Birth to 3 program to have a position like that. We have not filled that for over 3 years. And the issue with that position, it's so specific and difficult to fill, and it's a position that really generally doesn't do some of the other work that's needed in both the children's long-term support and Birth to 3 programs. What we would be asking to do is just to eliminate that position and to create another case manager position that would be fully funded by the revenue that that position would be able to bill for and bring in from the state. Currently, our 2 staff who do the CLTS and Birth to 3 work have a combined caseload of, I think, 91 families that they're working with, or children with their families. And that's just way too high for them to do sufficient service for them, for the needs that those children with special needs have. There's a need for an additional case manager by eliminating the existing position that really is not a billable position, it's not a funded position, and replacing it with a position that would be funded. This can help us meet the needs of the CLTS and the Birth to 3 program. This would make the caseloads manageable for those staff and allow them to sufficiently meet the needs of the families. You'll see on page 2 of the summary, the staff have worked with our business and financial services manager to cost out how that would work. So the cost of filling that position would be $82,726. And with what they would be able to bill for their caseload would cover the cost of adding that position. Currently, we have not filled the existing position, the educator position, because it's not fully funded, and we don't have the budget for it. And I don't know if Lori or Miranda, if you have anything you would want to add.
Either of you?
The only
Any-
only thing, I think Tracy said it well, just that their the statewide average for case managers in these programs is 25 to a maximum of 40 clients, and yeah, they carry an average of 46 clients each. I know at points in time. Last calendar year, that was well beyond that.
Okay, thank you. But with the additional revenues collected, or you're figuring this to be a $0 zero sum, aren't you?
That's correct.
Yes, okay. Good to me. Anyone want to make a motion? Do we still have a quorum? Let's see, 1, 2, 3. Yes, we do. Yes, Mr. Williamson.
Move to approve.
Motion to approve the suggested change has been made. Do we have a second? Seconded by Mr. Turk. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We've approved it. Do we want to take number 15 on the agenda since Tracy is here, which is approval of bonuses and recognition of personnel who made significant contribution to the public health emergency response to the community during the COVID-19 pandemic? Who has suggested that? Is that one of yours, Tracy?
Yes, it is, Mr. Chair. If you don't mind, I'll go ahead.
Yes, please do.
So yes, this is a request to approve an expenditure of $44,500 that would come from the Division of Public Health allocation that Health and Human Services receives to provide essentially recognition bonuses and commemorative plaques for the individuals who contributed to the public health response to the community. So as you know, the past 2 years of the pandemic, not just with Health and Human Services, but with emergency management in particular, and staff from some other departments have put their daily work responsibilities on hold or tried to juggle those, plus working to help with the response to the community during this public health crisis. Things that were done were providing the testing services that are still going on, disease investigations, contact tracing, vaccine clinics, and other support activities to provide to the community, consultation to schools and businesses, making sure that information was put out so that the community could respond to various things as they were happening. Some duties even required staff to don full protective, personal protective equipment to protect against the risk of contracting the virus while they're working in the testing events and the vaccine clinics. Many worked in outdoor inclement weather conditions at the testing sites. Others worked extra hours during evenings and weekends, providing disease investigations or performing other needed support activities to assist with the response for the community. Several also participated in the Emergency Operations Center meetings, regularly advised and provided information to our community members and organizations to help them keep safe or keep their people safe. There were 33 Richland County personnel who we've identified who are still with the county system, and they are the individuals who did this above and beyond work. So you might know that the Department of Health Services has been going around on a campaign to thank the public health heroes across the state. And now with our county's Emergency Operations Center stepping down the incident command, it seems like now's an opportunity for the county to recognize our own local public health heroes who helped our citizens to get through this difficult time. So the proposal is to request that we utilize these funds to provide bonuses, really as a recognition to that extra duties that staff took on for the community. There's a schedule of recommended bonuses based on the level of involvement that these staff had. Some staff, were involved throughout the entire pandemic. Some staff took on extra duties during portions of the pandemic. And so as a way to try to recognize those different levels of contribution, this schedule is what we had come up with to try to at least quantify that in some way. We would also be asking that these individuals be formally recognized by county board resolution and presented with a plaque that commemorates their contributions, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. I have a question. Would you consider this more a state initiative, a state of Wisconsin initiative, seeing as it comes from the Department of Health, state of Wisconsin, or would you consider this a more local thing, or both?
Well, these funds, we received approval from the state to utilize this allocation for this purpose. We have this allocation is being utilized still to help us with our vaccine clinics and the testing and the other work that's being done still with the public health emergency. So these are state funds, but each county is making a decision about how they recognize the staff in their county for responding to the community.
Okay, then I have a follow-up question then. Are there not others employed by the county who might be deserving of this kind of bonus? Perhaps not particularly those that you've identified. I'm thinking EMTs, deputies, et cetera, who have had contact certainly with COVID in the pursuit of their occupation.
Mr. Chair, I certainly wouldn't want to suggest that, there weren't people all across the entire county who assisted with efforts. The focus here, I think, is really on what the public health response was to the community to address the community's ability to cope in the pandemic. I know that certainly, and I know there may be other department heads who can speak to some of these things. Certainly everybody in the county worked to keep our county services available and operating throughout the pandemic. And so certainly that deserves recognition as well. This focuses on those staff who did the work in responding to the pandemic, specific public health work that was done. So I certainly wouldn't want to disregard any of those other efforts. This allocation would only be able to be used for the public health response.
Right, because it's an allocation from the state. Other finance board members, do you have a comment and or question?
Approve.
Okay, Luck makes the motion to approve this request. Do we have a second? Mr. Caro seconds. Okay, we have a motion to do as suggested here, use this bonus award of $43,000 for specifically the public health emergency group. And then commendation plaques is also included in that. Are you including that as well?
Yes.
And Steve, you seconding that motion? Okay. All right, I'll call for a vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay, it's approved. Now, it seems that if we're going to present plaques, that we probably need a corresponding resolution at the board level, I would think. Going to then move to item number, sorry, we're jumping around here. Carol is patiently waiting there. I see municipal advisory agreement with Wisconsin Public Finance Professionals. Probably why she's still here. So I think we'll take that one next, and that this would be a motion to hire Carol. So someone want to make that
I
as a
can-
motion?
I can pull up the action language here quickly. So
Sure.
looking today, Mr. Chair, for a motion to recommend resolution of the Richland County to enter into an agreement with Wisconsin Public Finance Professionals in the amount of $26,500 to provide necessary loan services. This contract secures Wisconsin Public Financing Professionals, Carol Worth, to coordinate all necessary actions with the $8.5 million borrowing. Mr. Chair.
Thank you. So someone want to put that in the form of a motion? Mr. Turk, seconded by Mrs. Luck. All those in favor of this motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay, Carol, you're hired. Now, number 13, we're going to go back to this now. The utilization policy for remaining Fund 75 and Fund 92. We have two petitions, Simon's Natatorium Board and Fair Recycling and Parks. Mr. Langrick?
Mr. Chair, I do have one more item that you're going to find in your folder. It's going to be item number 13. I don't think there was time to get it on the internet as I only got it available a few hours prior to the meeting, but in compliance with county board, with strategic plan, with this committee's initiative to try to make decisions based on putting forward policies versus individual decisions on some of these types of things, I have a drafted policy that you're going to find again in your folder, item number 13, and I'll pull it up here for viewing. So the first half of policy, and trying to find our policy on policy format, which is terrifically geeky, but does serve a purpose. And running down, this would be a title of a policy: expenditure of remaining Fund 75 and Fund 92 2021 borrowing funds for capital improvements. Authority languages are a reference to a referencing previous resolutions and such for looking back for historical. The purpose of this policy is to establish utilization of remaining funds for the 2020 $2.9 million notes borrowing and the 2021 short-term note financing funds, and then also to establish authority and discretion in expending these funds. The scope of this project, it applies to everybody and extends to partners in utilization of these funds. The policy overview, we reference back in time to January 21st and February 18th of 2020, and then September and October when we went forward with authorizations, and then with awards, much like the process we had talked about with Carol today. This policy is set in place to help manage the remaining appropriations of these capital borrowed funds. This policy will then supersede previous resolution that we took in place with Resolution 2138, which established our short-term capital borrowing program. The policy performance is to utilize all the utilization appropriations and or transfers of the 2.9 in short-term capital borrowing shall comply with this policy, and then deviations are required to take back from the county board unless specified, and we do have some specifications in here. Getting to the actual policy content then, we have language then that would say the matrix found below, which we'll get to, Appendix B, is of this policy outlines the proposed utilization of the remaining funds. Authority is given to finance and personnel to adjust items and appropriations as seen fit or as recommended by the administration and staff, and to allow for administrative contingencies. All expenditures must be in compliance with the resolution language defining the purposes of the borrowing. So as again, we heard from Carol today as she described our borrowing that we're considering now for the 8.5, we have included in this policy the language for those two borrowings with their legal languages of what they can be applied to, which is broad. Our next bullet point there says then expenditures related to rule number 14 regarding equipment purchase and contract expenditures are approved by adoption of this policy as long as the expenditure is used on the desired purpose by resolution and within the appropriated amounts authorized by the policy or amended by Finance and Personnel Committee. Additional resolution is not required by the county board. So this is seen then again if we can take this through the county board with reference to the Appendix B, as long as departments are spending within that amounts for those items for contracts and for equipment, there's not a need to come back with a follow-on resolution to the county board. Again, exception to that rule then is public works. Public works projects, though, would require to go back to the county board because there are additional details we have to make sure that we're sorting out in compliance with state statute 595229. Utilization periods, the intention is then to expend all these funds in agreement with what we have listed on here with Matrix B. Exception to that provision, so if there's any type of extensions then beyond the matrix call for date, it's decided by you folks here. But do keep in mind, though, that all funds from the $2.9 million borrowing must legally be utilized by no later than 5 March 2023. Then this policy will terminate on the completion of appropriations and expenditures of funds addressing these policies, so that it'll, it goes away. It'll be kept as a historical document, public document, but as far as pointing to it for policy guidance, it'll expire. This is very small and probably hard to see on your screen, but it's a breakdown, if you will. Get some lessons learned here after we talk about this. But so what you're seeing here from left to right is, first off on the top is your Fund 75, the $2.9 million that we borrowed in September of 2020. It has the criterias that were decided on when we went forward, very broad strokes. It has the amounts that were approved for those. We did have one adjustment to that we took forward by action with Simons on adjusting some amounts. The current spending for those and the balance remaining on those, and then an appropriation of projects to say, are we using it for that project existing, or are we reappropriating it? And we have a completion date on when departments are saying they're done, or when we're telling departments that it must be completed by, and then a cost expenditure on the project column on the far right. So, and looking across here then, we have technology is expended. We have parks. There's still the ongoing well project, guidance to complete by October of this year. We have an ambulance emergency management fund that was put in there initially, was for a ambulance garage for the command center. With situation being with the ambulance garage, we recommended that that's reappropriated now towards the new ambulance garage building, specifically to help with making sure that there's funds there to get the water main from the street to the building to help make sure that the sprinkler system is in place. So we're planning on utilizing all those funds for that project. For the fairgrounds, appropriation request for roughly $756.79 for building 10, restoration and improvements. And then we have $4,999 and another $10,000 for lights that have been approved to the best of my knowledge, but just hasn't impacted our with getting the bills into the system. And then we're asking then for an additional $35,000 for a skid steer, meaning that there's the fully remaining price will be used for those projects at fairgrounds. For the roof project, we have overages based on our estimates, and then some maneuvering that we had done to push it towards Simons to ensure that we're sharing the cost with the city. Highway were expended. Sheriff's Department, we had overage. Simons, the money is sitting there, but we're awaiting then to transfer it to show the reflection of having the city spend it and our spending it, and then also accounting then for the plastering the pool project, which is a separate petition that you can handle, or you can take on today if you choose not to go forward with a policy arrangement. Administrator was over. We did an over allocation on that. I think that line item went towards the new courtroom, courtroom 2 project. We have new equipment line in here that is all broken down for you in the blue, to the best of our knowledge of what those were intended for, as many of those lines were pulled out of 2021 budgets and expected to be paid for out of this fund. Child support, we have reappropriations to a courthouse roof. That money was initially put in place to have a wall. We found an in-house solution through Randy of a significantly less dollar amount. Land conservation, still anticipating using the $97,000 for the supplemental dam project to hopefully be complete by October, utilizing those funds, reappropriating the AED squads money, Sheriff's Department for the new roof project, and then ambulance remaining for that project, the $213,000 will be used in full. So from Fund 75, the total appropriations that I would be asking forward to be forwarded to the roof project would be $51,000. But then in calculations for our overages that we had in our lines, we're minusing $44,000, for then essentially a difference of $7,481 that are going to be reappropriated from these other department expenses towards the roof project on the historic courthouse. For the Fund 92 tracker, which is the short-term borrowing for 2021, same type of a breakdown here. We put some in for the courthouse knowing that we had some problems to fix with it. We'd still like to use $18,000 of it for 2022, 3 heater exchanges, and then transferring the rest to the roof project. For administration, there was that amount that arrived at there, I think, was the additional on the note and the interest rate that was just allocated to the administrator line, thinking that not sure what we were going to do with the administrator's office at the time. Recommend that gets put towards the roof. HHS had 6,000 on there to address heating and cooling needs and still has intentions of using that again before October 31st. Highway MIS is spent. Sheriff's Department, there was still 19,000 remaining yet over on their vehicles, recommending that be put towards the roof. And then UW campus, there was a small amount of $20,000 remaining, $2,000 recommending to be put towards the roof. So a total then from the Fund 92 2021 of $92,475.64 reappropriated towards the historic courthouse roof. So a total of just about $100,000 of those two funds then are reappropriated to the courthouse roof. And again, that's a $272,000. We've already paid the first $96,000 of it from ARPA funds. This would then cover kind of payment 2, and then we'd have the additional payment 3 then, which would roughly be about the next 80,000 or so then would still be coming from ARPA. So a lot there, but the main premise and point is this would be a policy in place of saying this is where we're going to appropriate these existing borrowing funds and using them for these types of causes. Taking this also to the county board so they can approve and say, yes, use it for these causes, thereby negating needs to come back for future resolutions unless it's outside of the context of these items.
Sheriff Porter has a question.
I just want to make sure in the Fund 92 portion where it says that I have $19,000 left, I do have some bills that have not come through yet in that. So I guess we need to convene on that and discuss that further, but I just wanted to touch on that.
Okay, so we're still tracking. So there might be a shortage on that fund, but then any remaining funds we'd still be putting towards the courthouse. Okay, so, yeah, if you can send that to me, CC to Tammy Wheelock, that would be, and maybe you already have and I missed it.
Administrator Langdrick, if we pass this request for overall approval, does it make then 13A and 13B redundant because they can be handled through this special request mechanism?
It would be handled through this policy. If you would like to still, though, if you'd like to do something different, if you want to amend this matrix here of Appendix B and consider those items separately, or if you want to say, don't like the policy, we still want to entertain them individually, it's an option to you. If you want to amend what's on here, that's okay as well. I know we had discussion coming from the last meeting where there was asking for additional information regarding the skid steer, the $35,000 that would be found underneath in here with Fair and Grounds, of which I can say that Carla and Randy did some due diligence in hunting down some numbers from across the region on what the other options look like. Might still be in favor through this policy to consider those as underneath the capital projects borrowing.
Okay, so Clint has suggested a mechanism to streamline things, as he always does. I have no problem with that. I think that's the way we should go. So I'll make that as a motion, Cheryl, that we approve the mechanism that Clint described. And if I get a second on that, Mr. Carroll, yes, Mr. Carroll seconds. Now, what I'm saying is that if you vote in favor of this motion, then we are approving the request from Simons and the request from Fairs.
Ask a question about one of those?
Beg pardon?
Excuse me. Can I ask a
Yes,
question?
you may.
Discussion? Okay. One of the tasks we asked was that they speak with Simpsons about the current setup, and I didn't see a response to that. All I saw was the 2 bids from the people in Sauk City.
Okay, Carla is here. Carla, you want to come up to the mic and address that question? So we still have that motion in a second. We haven't voted yet.
All right, what was your question? I'm sorry. Ma'am.
So we had asked that you go back to Simpson to find out if they would, what the situation was as far as, I don't remember the exact wording, but it was essentially talking to them to find out if they would continue to lease to us at the deal that we were getting.
So for, I'm sorry, so for future leases, the lease options were what we forwarded to Clint, I believe, yesterday, because we just got it. So the first lease would be, the monthly payment would be $1,082.92 if we
Is that
did it
from
on.
Simpsons?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, so I don't see that in our iPads anywhere. All I see is these.
Yeah, those were sent last week. This one was the one that was sent yesterday. So with Simpson, the 3-year lease would be $1,082.92 a month, and that would be 12 months of, for a 3-year lease. And the ending total price would be $38,985.03 at the end of that year lease, with the buyout option of $1, I believe, is what they told us. The 60-month or 5-year lease was $678.95 per month, with the total end cost of $40,737. Where if we buy it outright, the cost would be $36,350. And I believe they still needed to apply that municipal discount, which I think is roughly around $2,000. So that would bring us a little bit under our request, but I still left it at the 35, just in case there were any.
So you're so the quote you're considering would be the Simpsons one, not these ones you sent us from Rock City.
Well, we actually haven't put it out to bid yet. So what we were looking for is, we were just bringing you guys numbers of what a rough estimate would be, so that we could put it out to bid and follow the county procedure, knowing that they will then go out to these two and other dealers as well. Yes.
Thank you. That Simpsons information just wasn't in anything I saw, so.
That's my fault. Carla had sent that to me
Yesterday.
yesterday.
It came in
so I
yesterday.
didn't get it into your folder, so
Okay.
we'll have it added.
That answers my question, then thank you.
You're welcome.
Oh, you might have. Okay, I think we're at our informal recess.
Yes, all those in favor of that? Favor of the resolution signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay, we have one more thing on the agenda that needs action.
Mr. Chair, recommend with your needs to go, and we're going to break quorum here. We can hold on item number 14. My reports are filed. They're in your folder for viewing. It did not require any actions on those. I do recommend, though, a discussion probably then put it into future agenda items and then adjournment. You did mention future months of potentially having the meeting then earlier at 12:30.
12:30 meeting.
We'll be meeting a second time this month.
Was not intending to meet a second time this month. But certainly we're going to find stuff. There's plenty enough to do. So if you want to,
we can meet again.
I've got in the calendar that I had sent out, I think I still was reserving kind of that third Friday of the month as I think what I ended up kind of calling as public hearing. And anticipated of using that as.
So do we know if the other members are going to be able to make it in the middle of the day, Manning and Williamson? I know, Steve, middle of the day is tough for you. Especially twice a month. I'm just.
Yeah, daytime and twice a month, daytime is gonna be, yeah. I don't know, I guess we can poll people, do a Survey Monkey or.
Sorry,
But Sean, who all was missing?
Okay, we'll figure out a time. Thank you. Be safe, Marty.